inshallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear respected brothers, sisters, guests, welcome to the first of our 4 webinars this month. Alhamdulillah, it's a great honor to have our speaker here today to talk about a very important topic. Dr. Riza Muhammad will be speaking about dealing with loss and grief in accordance with the Quran and Sunnah. Dr. Riza is no stranger to these seminars, and I'll share a bio of him. So Dr. Riza Muhammad is an orthopedic and trauma surgeon by profession. He's also a tutor, examiner, clinical and education supervisor of medical students at the University of Liverpool. He studied traditional Islamic sciences under the leading Islamic scholars in the Middle East, Southeast Asia. He's edited and compiled a number of works, and including Lots to Do, an activity book for Muslim children, Islamic Workers Manual, Training Manual, Journey Through Islam in the Early Hours by Murad, Islam, the Way of Revival, and the Ayat Manual. He's lectured extensively on the subject of spiritual and self-development over the past 3 decades. He's also taught Quranic, Arabic, and Islamic sciences at the annual Summer Knowledge Seekers Retreat program from 2006 to 2013, organized by ISB and Young Muslims. He's an executive committee member of the EAQS, that's the European Academy of Quranic Studies, where he regularly organizes and conducts educational seminars at the Heritage Centre in Manchester, and he's also trustee of the Islamic Foundation. He's also no stranger to the UQIM, having attended many of our programs across the country and also delivered part of the Torchbearers Leadership Program. So, Kullu nafsin za'iqatul maut. That is the one thing that we are promised. That is the one thing Allah says, every soul shall taste death. And it's a very somber time for anyone dealing with death. And people can go either way. They can break down totally, lose their senses, or they can deal with it as we are taught to, according to the Quran and the Sunnah. And Dr. Riza, inshallah, will, over the next 35 minutes or so, speak to us about how to deal with it in accordance with the Quran and Sunnah. And following that, there'll be a short interactive session, around 15 minutes, where we will have questions and answers as well. So if anyone feels like throughout the talk, feel free to post a question in the chat section, which you can see to the right-hand side, and we'll take the questions all together at the end. So I'll hand over to Dr. Riza Muhammad for the rest of the program, and hope everyone benefits. Jazakallah khair.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الكريم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم على عبدك ورسولك محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum everyone. We're already into the second week of the Ramadan, and really it's an opportunity for us to make best use that we can. You know, one of the things that when Brother Sajjad mentioned, you know, Kullu dha'iqatul maut, it also reminds us that rooted in our tradition of fasting in this month of Ramadan is a reminder of our own mortality. You know, it's something which is really important for us to be able to consider, inshallah. And being in the midst of a pandemic where we've seen something like now over 3.5 million cases of people being infected by COVID-19, as well as over 250,000 people who have now passed away. it's an opportune time for us to consider this topic because so many of our loved ones are falling prey to either the infection or some have succumbed to the illness. So inshallah. So what I would like to do first is I'm going to share my screen for my presentation, inshallah. Right, okay. So the topic that we want to be discussing today, inshallah, is that of managing grief and loss. And we're going to try and see if it is that we can relate that from what the Quran and what the Sunnah teaches us about this particular subject, inshallah. Now, if we think about the meaning of the terms grief, loss, bereavement, mourning, these are terms that we use in our vocabulary, but what exactly do they mean? When we think about the idea of grief as a process, we realize that grief, the process involves a sequence of affective, cognitive, and psychological states as a person responds to and finally accepts a loss which may occur in his or her life. That's something which is really important because this is something that is happening internally and is manifesting itself externally in terms of how the person responds. Loss, we all undergo loss, when we lose something of value or someone who is maybe close to us. Grief is that total response to our emotional experience related to that particular loss, whereas bereavement represents a subjective response by our loved ones, and mourning is that behavioral response. So these are some of the terms that I'm going to be using during the course of the presentation, just to sort of ensuring that all of us are on the same page, inshallah. The first thing I want to remind us about is this ayah of the Quran from Surah Al-Baqarah, which is one of the last ayat of the Quran that was revealed in the Quran. And where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ. And these are the last words, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed down to us. And what were those words? Those words were to be conscious, that to be mindful of the day on which you shall be brought back unto God. You will be brought back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereupon every single human being will be repaid in full for what it has earned, and none shall be wronged. That's important because it also gives us a sense of purpose, a sense of mission, and a reminder to where our destiny lies, that our destiny is beyond this world. The next thing I want to talk about, I want to come to, is this whole idea of death. Now, this is whole express, this idea of death and of hating death is something which you can derive some understanding from the Sunnah, from this hadith which was narrated by Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha. And she said that she heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that man ahabba liqa Allah ahabba Allahu liqa'ahu wa man kariha liqa Allah kariha Allahu liqa'ah, which means that whoever loves to meet Allah, Allah loves to meet him, and whoever hates to meet Allah, Allah loves to meet him, and Allah hates to meet him. And it is said, it was said to him, O Messenger of Allah, does not hating to meet Allah mean hating to meet death? Because all of us hate death. And he said, no, rather that it is only at the moment of death, that everybody hates that moment when the angel of death will come upon us to take our souls away from us. But if he is given the glad tidings of the mercy and the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he loves to meet Allah, and Allah loves to meet him. And if he is given the tidings of the punishment of Allah, of course he hates to meet Allah, and Allah hates to meet him. So the idea of death, or being of something which everybody hates, is not something necessarily linked with the idea of meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are two more or less distinct things. And there is a there is a small tradition, from our from the time of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, when the angel of death came to Prophet Ibrahim, and the angel of death said that I have come to take your life. And the response of Ibrahim was, I am the friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What type of friend will take the life of his friend? And so the angel replies, what type of friend will he to meet his friend? And that's that there is so much wisdom in that small little anecdote, where it's about thinking about not just about death, but what is beyond death. And if it is that you work sincerely to meet and to be at peace with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there for you, inshallah, and the outcome will be positive. Now, added to that, I wanted to draw our attention to this saying of Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, which I'm sure many of you have heard before, and we say it over and over again. The hasibu anfusakum qabla an tuhasib. Qabla an tuhasibu, that judge yourself before you are judged. And that's very important, that we need to be continuously evaluating ourselves in this world before we return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's almost as if we are doing our accountability of Judgment Day now before we actually judged in the hereafter. So this idea of death, the Quran describes as something which is a calamity, something which is not easy, it is quite difficult. And the Quran says, وَأَصَابَتْكُمْ مُصِيبَةُ الْمَوْتِ, describing death as a calamity, as a musiba, as a great misfortune that will befall someone. That's the nature, and the way that is the Quran describes it. And there is this another hadith where, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that from the time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created him, which is the son of Adam, has not come across anything that is more distressing to him than that of death. And what comes after is even more distressing, meaning in the next world, for those who have not earned the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if perhaps perchance we do lose someone, the first thing I think I want to emphasize is that we should understand that grieving is an essential part of the healing process that follows such a loss. Grieving is something which is essential and part of that healing process. And I'm going to go through 5 stages of grieving, which have been described by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was a Swiss-American psychiatrist who did a lot of studies on near-death studies with medical students, with healthcare professionals, with people who had terminal disease in the 1950s, in the 1960s. She did a tremendous amount of work, and she came up with this idea of 5 stages of loss, inshallah, which we'll go through. I'm well aware that there are some contemporary studies which have questioned the validity of her work, but her work is still very much prevalent, and I do believe that a lot of what she spoke about then, even though it may not be a linear process as she herself has alluded to and has admitted, but they do contain a lot of important things inside that we can benefit from, inshallah. So I'm going to share some ideas from her work, inshallah. So she describes that the stages of grief are 5. So you go through a stage of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And you don't necessarily go through them in a linear fashion. It could be that you skip one, you go back to one. You take different time intervals for each stage. But these are the 5 stages that she described. And it's if you were to draw it as a curve, then it's often called the Kubler-Ross grief curve, going through all of these 5 stages. And these 5 stages are also helpful not just for people who may be undergoing, some form of grieving, but also for those who are at their side, those who are trying to lend them support, as well as healthcare professionals who can better understand what is happening to that person as they are undergoing that grieving process. So what is the grieving process? Well, it's described into 5, as I mentioned before. And the first one is described as that of shock and denial. And that's the first thing, because what happens is that when you hear of the loss of someone, and sometimes it could be even somebody who has a terminal illness, and you suddenly hear that that person, has passed away, the first thing is almost a sense of shock. Even though that you know it was coming, it was almost a matter of time. Still, it becomes a shock to you, and it's a sense. Are you sure? Is the news correct? Maybe you didn't get it right. Maybe something else. Maybe it refers to somebody else. So there's often a sense of shock, a sense of denial, and a sense of utter confusion which is going on in the person's mind, and perhaps even manifested in their behavior. And there's also a sense of fear. Well, that has happened to that person. Maybe it will happen to me. What is going to happen now? And for others, it's almost a sense of numbness that once the news comes to them, that they just can't respond, can't say anything. It's almost as if they are in a state of paralysis. And then the first thing, and then for others, it could be that suddenly they strike out at others and try to say and blame. And normally they tend to blame more themselves and say, well, look, and they begin to think, well, what have I done wrong? What did I do to allow this to happen? Not realizing that ultimately the one who is responsible for taking the life of any one of us is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But as people go through this stage of shock and denial, it is important to understand that this is not that a person is trying to not accept the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It could be that the person is a learned person in the community, maybe has a lot of knowledge of Islam, maybe is highly respected. It doesn't matter who you are. You will go through this stage of shock and denial. But when it's done, it's not because you are denying or you question your faith. It's just a natural process, and it does not reflect a denial of the will or the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the idea is that denial is a normal human response and something for us to be able to understand. And even the words which are uttered are not necessarily the words that that person may well utter under normal circumstances. This is by no stretch of an imagination a normal situation when somebody that is close to them passes away. The other thing about is that denial does not define a weak iman or weak character, or people suddenly telling them, be careful what you say, be careful of this. What are you? Don't you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't you trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is not the time for that type of discourse. This is the time for be able to understand the shock. And the other thing about the shock and the denial phase is actually a coping mechanism. So each one of these, instead of looking at it as a sort of a psychological and an emotional response to what is happening to the grief, but it also represents a coping mechanism. How is that person coping and learning to adjust to the loss that they may have suffered in their life? So shock and denial gives you an opportunity for them just to be able to um, to sort of process the information which has come to them, and to go back and look at information again, and to see, and to be able to make sense of it. So that's the first stage of shock and denial. The second one, as I mentioned, is that of anger. And then suddenly after the person has, sort of realized that something has happened, now there's almost a sense of frustration, a sense of anxiety, a sense of irritation. Why has this happened now? Why now? Why have this person been taken away from me? Um, I have been doing everything in my power to ensure that this person gets the best possible treatment, and suddenly they have been taken away at a time when I seem to need them most in my life. And it could be that they embarrassed of maybe something that they did, or perhaps something they didn't do, or perhaps they just feel as though what others might be thinking about them. So there is this embarrassment, and often there is an element of shame as well. But this anger and this frustration which is happening is also a human response. And it doesn't mean that that person doesn't trust the God. It does not mean it's not a evidence of weak iman or weak character as well. but it's almost as if it's a coping mechanism. It's almost as if all of that emotion that is being derived from this sudden loss is being channeled into anger, and this may well be a way that that person might be coping with whatever is happening. For another person, it might be totally different. It could be that everything is all kept within and they're trying to make sense of it from within. But for others, it could be that they're sort of manifesting it, with others. The next stage is that, and that's important, but the important thing here is for us to be able to just to look back at some of the ayat of the Quran. So let's say we take this ayat from the Quran from chapter 2, verse 155 in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. And we will surely test you with something of fear and of hunger, of some loss of wealth, of lies, and of fruit of your labor. And these are important things for us to be able to consider, because in the midst of this pandemic that we are continuing to be at the moment undergoing, see all of these different things being manifested. We can see that we are being tested with fear. Everyone is concerned about, do I have it? Can I get it? Is it just a matter of time? What if I get it? Will I get severely ill? Will I need to be hospitalized? Will I need intensive care support? Will I be able to survive? So there is this whole element of fear. There is hunger. So many people have lost their jobs. So many people are on the bread line. So many people are starving because of this, because of the downturn in economies. There is loss of wealth. There are loss of lives. I've just mentioned that 251,000 people and counting, to be precise, has now lost their lives. And then there's, so all of these things are happening to us now. So these are things that for us to be able to know that when these things come, they represent tests from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the next ayah, الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّ إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. That those who, when a calamity befalls them, what comes to their mind are these words, that we belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our ultimate return. And these words becomes a form of a coping mechanism. It becomes a form of spiritual healing by the recitation of these words. These words are not just mere ritualistic words that we say, if we hear somebody dies, we say these words, and because we are taught to do it. But these are really healing words for you and for those around you. And it's a reminder it's a reminder for you in terms of the faith of others and what is going to be your faith as well. That we came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly to Him is our return. The next thing about it is that the Quran tells us that in the midst of all of this anger, we need to get some sense of motivation, something to be able to counteract this anger. And this is where the Quran comes in. In the next ayah, in 157, it tells us now, أُولَٰئِكَ عَلَيْهِمْ صَلَوَاتٌ مِّن رَبِّهِمْ وَرَحْمَةٌ وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُهْتَدُونَ. They are those on whom descend blessings from their Lord. Imagine that. If you were to bear all of these things with sabr, as the previous ayah tells us, if we were to bear these things with sabr, then what is going to happen for those who patiently persevere, as the ayah says? Then what is going to happen? Then we are going to be, the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will descend upon us. The rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will descend upon us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be able to provide some sense of guidance for our lives, to be able to make sense of where we go, the path that we should take. And therefore, for the one who is experiencing all of this anger, all of this frustration, now do you realize that there is some positivity which can come from this. And if it is that I were to take upon myself that challenge of dealing with this in a positive way, in a way where I bear it with patience and perseverance, then there is so much reward that can come in the midst of this calamity which has befallen me. So that's something important. And then the next one is that of depression and detachment. So after this phase of anger, then sometimes what happens is that person becomes so overwhelmed. Can I ever cope? Can I ever cope with the loss of the loved one, the loss of my sibling, or the loss of my mother or father, or my dear friend, or somebody else who was very close to me, you know? And then with this depression that seems to set in, there is a lethargy, there's a loss of energy, there's a sense of helplessness, and and that's important. So what do we do when we experiencing symptoms like that? It's important for us to go back and look at the therapy which the Quran offers us. And the therapy which the Quran offers that for us is that of recitation of the Quran, which are words of healing, which is a words of spiritual healing. The Quran offers us a reminder for us to be able to indulge in dhikr. Wa dhikr Allahi akbar. And the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the greatest thing that you can do. And to go back and to reconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reconnect with the source of all strength, reconnect with the one who can do something for us and the one who can do something for the one who has departed. And all of these, if we involve in these things, these are forms of micro affirmation, which will make us stronger, which will make us to be able to ride that storm of depression that may well be seemingly overpowering us. And then in the midst of all of that, remember that we do not want to do things to be able to undermine ourselves. So always remember our diet, our exercise, and our social contact. Remain in contact with others. Seek out mentors, seek out people who can listen to what we have to say, who can give us an ear and reach out to them. So that's the third stage. And then the Quran also tells us, "Alladhina idha asabathum musiba qalu inna Allahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un," as I mentioned before. So the next stage is that of dialogue and bargaining, where now you're trying to sort of reaching out to others, and you're trying to sort of make sense of what is happening. A desire to be able to tell your story, a struggling to find meaning of what is happening, why did this happen, and trying and really this dialogue and this bargaining, and even if it was somebody who maybe they were diagnosed with a terminal illness, maybe it could be that they begin this process of dialogue and bargaining, and even bargaining sometimes with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying, "Ya Allah, can you give me enough life so that I can experience the month of Ramadan? Can you give me enough opportunity to remain in this world? Do not allow my cancer to spread so that I can see my children, maybe finish their university or whatever, what have you." So you see there's some sense of dialogue and bargaining which tends to take place. But in the midst of all of that, in trying to moving from that stage of self-denial to that stage whereby we can make sense of what is happening, we can again go back to the Quran. And if we think about the ayah of the Quran that Brother Sajjad mentioned when we started, that kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. It's such an important, it's not just a Quranic expression. It's a word, or it's words of affirmation. It's words of healing. We're talking about death here, but it's also a word of healing, of reminding us that this life in this world is so temporary, that the only thing that we can be 100% sure about in this world is 100% probability that it will occur, and that is that each one of us will taste death. And then the Quran says again, وَمَا كَانَ لِنَفْسٍ أَن تَمُوتَ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ كِتَابًا مُؤَجَّلًا. And no human being can die save by the leave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it could be that somebody feels as though they're destined to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala maybe in a short period of time. but only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is remit, and He has that knowledge within, no one else. And only at that predetermined time that that person can pass away. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala remembers that never does our God grant a delay to a human being when his term has come. So if your term has come, then it will come. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is fully aware of all that we all do, all that you do. So if we were to take into consideration all of these ayat of the Quran, if we are to be able to understand the stages that we're going through, then we come to the stage of acceptance. The stage whereby the acceptance becomes now something which can be positive in our lives, something which can empower our lives, something in which we can begin to take charge of our lives once again. We can be able to increase and build upon our self-esteem. We can begin to see meaning in our life. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow me to maybe live and somebody else to die? Because He has a purpose in mind for us. He has something that He wants us to be able to do. He has given, each one of us is living, I often say that each one of us is living is almost on borrowed time. It is borrowed time that we have in this world. And in this borrowed time that we have from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we really have to strive to make best use of it, inshallah. And let us become forward-thinking and optimistic. And as we go through this, inshallah, then we can go through that grieving process, inshallah. This presentation with the hadith which deals with the sadness of the Rasul at the loss of his son Ibrahim. As we know, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he by the time he had died, he had buried his wife Khadija. He had buried all of his close family members. He had buried all of his daughters, Fatima. He had buried all of his, his sons. So all of them, he saw, he witnessed the loss of all of these family members of his. And again, you can see what is happening here when the realization suddenly dawns that Ibrahim, his son, is going to breathe his last. Ibrahim is an infant. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he enters into the room, and as he enters into the room, he's shedding tears. They are coming down his cheeks. And Abdurrahman ibn Auf, the Sahabi, he looks at the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he sees that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you are weeping, thinking that maybe the Rasul, he is a Rasul for Allah, he should be strong, he should be firm. And then he said, Yabna Auf, innaha rahmah. He said, oh Ibn Auf, this is a rahmah, this is mercy, and this is something for us to be able. So when you see someone crying, it's not because it's not because they are weak or they have weak faith, but this is rahmah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he himself, as he drew closer to Ibrahim, his son, he starts to weep and cry even more, and tears, and then he begins to say that al-aynu tadma', that my eyes are shedding tears, wal qalbu yahzan, and the heart is grieved, and we will not say except what pleases our Lord. O Ibrahim, indeed we are grieved by your departure from this world. So can you see the human emotion being expressed by the Rasul of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And in a sense, what was happening to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam at that time was that he himself was going through that grieving process. But you can see the human reaction, the human feeling, that it's not just all automated response that should come from each one of us. So when people show human emotions, this is reflective of our rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I pray inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this a presentation, one in which we can use to our benefit, and one in which we can remind ourselves, and one in which we can use when we see others undergoing this grieving process, that we can use it to advantage to be able to help them, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Riza. Thank you very much for the presentation on dealing with facing the situation of losing a loved one. And I hope that through the diagram that you took us through, the different stages of loss and grief, and the examples you provided from the Sunnah and the Quran, that hopefully we have some tools in our armor to deal with facing such situations. So Jazakallah khair for that. If there are any questions, please do leave them in the chat. We've got a few minutes yet, so we'll take the questions if there are any. What I wanted to do firstly was, just before we expand on some of these points, the seminar today, or the webinar today, is brought to you by iCare. iCare is a project of the UK Islamic Mission, and it serves to help those in need here in the UK. And I'll give you some examples of some of the types of work that we provide and offer here throughout the country. We have food hubs in multiple locations, from London up to Burnley and beyond as well. We work with the homeless, providing them with winter survival packs. We work with other local charities and national charities in catering for those that are needy in our communities here in the UK. We've also set up a hardship fund, delivering basic grants for the needy people. And our volunteers are also helping those that are suffering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic as well. So alhamdulillah, there's a lot of good work taking place. And I thought I'd share some of the work that iCare carries out across the country with you. The head of the department is Brother Waqar Ahmed. I'd like to thank him for helping us organize this webinar today as well. Okay, so let me see if there are any questions at the moment. I can't see any questions at the moment. So does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask directly? If you do, please just unmute yourself and feel free to ask away. One thing, Dr. Riza, that I wanted to mention to you was, often people have this impression that Muslims need to toughen up. They shouldn't show emotion. They shouldn't show affection. And from the examples you cited there, it's absolutely clear that as Muslims, we should show emotion. If we experience the death of a loved one, there is no harm and nothing wrong. In fact, it's shown in our history that's a part of the process of dealing with death, that we do show emotion. And we see from the best example in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that he too grieved at the loss of Ibrahim. So can you just maybe expand a bit more on that? And how have Muslims developed this thinking that we need to be macho and not show any emotion at all? When we know the Prophet ﷺ, he shared his emotion, he shared his affection. So yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, the thing about is what Islam is, Islam is a lived human experience. And Islam is for human beings, and human beings, will undergo all sorts of different emotions. It's almost like if it's a rocky ride that, we have to undergo in life. And I think when you look at the seerah, and you look at the Rasul, our example, also Hasana, what you would notice that, you when you look at the hadith, we often just focus upon the words, but you can see there are times when he would show displeasure. There are times when, he would be laughing. There are times when he would be joking. There are times when he would be, making fun. There are times when he would be very, very serious, when it comes to, dealing with serious issues. So you see this whole range of emotion, and that's important for us to be able to understand, and to be able to express. And it's not just one thing. And one of the things that as Muslims we forget is that when we look at the du'as that we make, we see that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us with grief. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not make us sad, to not to and these are all human emotions. And the fact that that the hadith and the du'as that we make and the du'as that made by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is expressive of all of these human emotions, is reflective of things that we all will have to go through as human beings. And therefore, when it comes to Islam and the way that we behave, we have to show the human side of us. We have to be able to acknowledge it, when we're in the midst of others as well. Sometimes we think that the way that we should communicate with others, or we should share the message of Islam with others, is by simply telling them. But it's not just about telling them. You may tell, you may share the words with people. But what people want more than anything else is to be able to share themselves, you to share yourself, you to be able to share your emotions, you to be able to share your affection, you be able to share to empathize with what they are doing. And that human part is sometimes something that we fall short of. If you undo your mic, Sajjad.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So I think we can take a lot from that because too often I've heard remarks from Muslims that say, we need to be tough, have faith in Allah, don't show your emotion, accept it. But this is what you mentioned. This is all part of the process. In order to accept it, there are other stages that we need to go through, and sharing your emotion, sharing your affection is part of that journey, isn't it? Okay. So are there any questions from?
I think everybody is probably concerned about what time is the breakfast, isn't it? So there are any questions?
I think I've muted everyone. I'm gonna unmute everyone because I'm not sure if they can unmute themselves. So let me unmute everyone. I hope there's no sudden explosion of sound. If there is, I'll have to mute everyone again. But I'll unmute, and if there is anyone, please do feel free to ask a question to Dr. Riza. We've got another.
Or even if you want to make a comment,
Yeah, a comment or contribute.
There's so much to be said on this topic, and sometimes we can share our experiences as well.
Yeah, if you have any experiences that you'd like to share with us as well, please do. Go ahead. Okay, I've unmuted everyone.
Yeah. So
would anyone like to ask or comment?
Okay. Well, I think everybody is just waiting for the. I think everybody's waiting for the iftar, Sajjad. I think we'll end it there for today.
That's fine. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Dr. Riza, again, for coming here today and sharing those thoughts with us. Sorry, Brother Khalid would like to say something. Brother Khalid.
Fadbal.
Khalid bhai?
Maybe not.
Let me see if I can unmute him. Just one moment.
People could have raised their hand as well.
Yeah, so raise your hand as well if you want to. That's fine. Allowed to talk. Okay, Brother Khalid, you're unmuted now. Khalid bhai?
Yes, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Yeah, can you hear me, brother?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, brother, as we have read and we have heard many times, alhamdulillah, that if you have a grief, if you have any loss, say inna lillahi inna ilaihi rajiun, and we hear all these condolences from Quran and Sunnah, and we all. But at the very time of grief, uh, why is it different? People, even people who know that this is grief is from Allah and this is test from Allah, you say inna lillahi inna ilaihi rajiun. And sometimes at the very time of grief, it is very hard to take it. What is the best?
The thing about it is that what is happening there and then is something which is, is natural. It is not something which is representative of a loss of faith. It's not that because you didn't know the ayah, or you didn't know to remember, or know to say inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. But it's something is that you're trying to be able to process information, and it's almost as if a shock has overcome you. It's almost as if you were suddenly involved in a, let's say you were involved in a car crash, all right, and even though you were still alert, and somebody suddenly comes to you and said, well, what happened? And then all of a sudden, sometimes you can't talk, you can't say anything, and you can't even realize what has happened. It's almost as if you've lost that, you've gone through amnesia, where you become almost paralyzed. And it's about being able to be able to get to the stage where you have to be able to process the information. So when you have a shock which is coming into the system, and how that shock is being looked at, at the level of the brain, is something that we need to be able to take note of. Now, the question you ask is, what can we do to make it easier for ourselves? Of course, we can use expressions like inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. But I just want to draw to your attention to help us understand this, in what happened when the Rasul of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam died. One of the first things that we realized that when he died, and we just spoke about this grieving process. Umar ibn al-Khattab knew he had died. But there was a sense of denial at that time that he had actually died. How dare you say? And anybody who says that he has died was willing to take his sword out to be able. You can see what is happening. So we talked about denial, we talked about frustration, we talked about anger, and all of these things were happening at the same time when the Rasul of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had passed away. Did he know about inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un? Did he not know that there was an ayah in the Quran that talks about, that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam will pass away like the messengers who passed away before him? Did he not, even when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq had come, and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the calm one, the one who was level-headed at that time, the one who was understood what was happening, it's only when he articulated that ayah of the Quran in public, then people suddenly said to themselves, they never knew, it was an ayah that they recited, but they never understood what it meant. They never knew, they never realized that it will come to that there will be a day when, even though they would have known, I mean, they were intelligent people, they would have known that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he will have to die at some point. But the shock that came into their system at that point in time was so much that they were in a total state of confusion. And this is the state of confusion I'm talking about. And these were the best of the companions. We can't compare ourselves with them in terms of knowledge of Quran, in terms of how strong their faith were. And if they can go through all of these stages that we are talking about, we can remind ourselves that that it's something which is quite human. It's a human response that is happening.
Jazakallah, Dr. Riza. Brother Khalid, hope that's okay.
Brother, and if you have time, and then something hadith related to this topic is that how can we like understand that hadith, what you have just explained, Jazakallah khair, that sabr is that the sabr is that which is at the time of matter, and and once the matter has gone and people don't show sabr, we don't show sabr, then we show sabr after some time anyway. So how can we relate that hadith to this matter?
Okay, so the point about sabr is a really important point that you brought. Now the point about sabr is this, is that if you think about how the body responds, let's say to an infection, let's say to COVID-19. So what the body has to do is that if you get infected, if let's say for instance you get infected, then the body has to be able to help yourself. The body has to be able to mount what we would describe as being an immune response. You're right. Now, so that the body is able to mount this immune response depending upon the level of immunity that you have. So, for instance, we would say we are asking our elderly people and those with a lot of comorbidities like diabetes and heart conditions and other things to be even more quarantined than anyone else. Why? Is because of the inability of the bodies to be able to mount that immune response. Now the question is, how do you develop, how do you ensure that if it is that you do get infected or you do face some sort of a dilemma, as we're talking about in terms of a loss, is to do exactly what you've mentioned. And that is that we have to be able to develop sabr out of a time when we, in other words, develop sabr in the good times. You know, develop sabr when you have a simple loss. Develop the art of perseverance, the art of resilience at that time. The more that you can develop that, the more that you can utilize some of the ayat of the Quran that I have drawn upon today, and many more that we can come across in the Quran. Use them as not just words of mere recitation, but use them as form of dhikr, form of remembrance, forms of spiritual healing. The more we will be able to build our resilience, to build our sabr, to build our capacity to be able to deal with an obstacle, or with a dilemma, or with a calamity when it does befall us, rather than waiting when something happens and then suddenly we say, well, you know what, I need to have sabr. Well, you didn't have sabr for all of this length of time. How is a sabr suddenly going to come? The sabr will come, yes, but the sabr will be far more of benefit to you if you had reserves of it, which you have developed over time. That's something for us to think about, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair.
Dr. Riza, there's a question here from one of the guests. It's what's the importance of Surah Youssef when it comes to dealing with loss and grief? Is that something you can shed some light on?
Yeah, I think Surah Youssef is one of those amazing surahs. But there are a lot of things that stand out in Surah Youssef, but one of them is the example of Prophet Yaqub, or Jacob, and that sabr which he has, which is called sabr jamil, you know, that beautiful patience which the Quran describes, and that is something, that sense of perseverance, that is something that he was somebody who never gave up, and he, even though even though we can see that he had a sense of foresight in terms of not believing something, always having that sense of hope. And if there is one thing for us to be able to learn from his life, is his resilience, is his perseverance, and his hope that someday that he will be reunited with Youssef. And that's something important. But it's not just, and it's something where, you know, he also had to be able to deal with shaitan, with external influences, for influence of others, to be able to see, well, you know, I am somebody who is so religious. I am somebody who, don't do things to displease God. Yet God has taken away my son from me, you know, seemingly done that. And he knew, he had an inkling that the people who were responsible for that were his children, were his other sons. So if it was simply a question of a wolf or some sort of an animal, taking hold of his son and causing him to, to be injured or to die, that's one thing. That's an accident that can happen to anyone. But knowing that the person who is responsible to the fate of the one that he loves so much, even though he had previously warned them about it, were other members of his household that he had to interact in and deal with day in, day out. But yet he just didn't have hope, not only hope for Youssef, but hope for his other children. Hope that somehow, in the midst of all that had happened, that they will also find a way to the right path. And that is something that so at least one lesson. And there's so many other lessons that we can draw upon, from that of Prophet Youssef, his interactions when he was in Egypt and what happened to him when he went into prison and how he was imprisoned. But the important thing about when he was in prison is that he never gave up, his values and the things that he believed in. The things that he believed in, he stuck to it, no matter what. And that is something important for us to take note of, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. We've got a couple of comments here. One from Brother Waqar, just say, mashallah, thank you very much for a very knowledgeable talk. We've got another one, excellent presentation, especially the Islamic perspective. So I think, alhamdulillah, a lot of thanks coming from the guests today. If there are no other questions, if no one else wants to raise their hands,
yeah,
then,
I think we should stop, because I think you need to make those samosas, Sajjad, and get
yes,
the biryani all warmed up for.
it's time to get the samosas on the cooker. So yeah, so Jazakallah khair, thank you all very much for attending and for listening. Next week, inshallah, next Tuesday, we'll have Brother Naseem Ashraf talking about keeping zakat local. The week after, we'll have Dr. Shazad Amin, and he'll be talking about depression, inshallah. Sorry, Dr. Riza, just got one point someone just raised, if you've got time. He says, we are told mourning is for 3 days. Loss and grief in this lockdown period is being held in check. Once social distancing is over, those feelings will come back in huge waves. Any advice for communities to deal with this?
Absolutely, because now one of the things that we have to understand about this whole concept of mourning, it doesn't mean, the Prophet is not trying to tell us that, you've got, I'm giving you 72 hours, get all of these, all of these negative feelings out of your system and get back to normal. That's not what it's all about. The period of grieving, as I've described before, is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a few hours, nor a few days, and it may well take a lot longer. For some people, it takes years to get over things. And some people, they never get over everything. But it just about manage to learn how to be able to cope. Some people never cope. Some people, for the rest of their life, they never manage to get through the stages. So these things are going to happen, especially for those people who, let's say, for instance, we are all in isolations. Someone that they knew of, a close family member or friend, went to the hospital. They had to be isolated, and of course, because of isolation, they may not necessarily get the opportunity to be able to interface with them, even while they were critically ill in hospital. And that's something which is difficult for both parties. It's difficult, one, for the one who is in hospital, because the one who is in hospital in those last few moments, while they are corpus mente, they are thinking, well, look, I need to be able to, give my final farewell to my family, to my friends, and to this one, to that one, to tell people or to ask for forgiveness and everything else. That's one of the things. That's why you notice now that in many of our hospitals here in the UK, that each ward, like for instance in our hospital, every ward and every bay in a ward has an iPad that patients can use. So if it is that they are ill, and because others can't visit them, then they can communicate via FaceTime and stuff like that. So that's important. But so that you'll find that the grieving process that we've described is going to be something which is far more difficult, and therefore there will be a lot of outpouring of emotion after this lockdown. Now, what may well happen is that this outpouring, especially if the government suddenly says, everybody can suddenly go out, and then you find that people started to gather even more, and this could even, expedite things in terms of people becoming infected. So that's another thing to be wary and to be conscious about as well. But I think, through our ability to communicate virtually, it is important for us to be able to stay in contact with people. You do not necessarily have to be hugging people and be in their physical presence. One of the most unfortunate thing about this whole experience of COVID-19 is the recommendation to do what we describe as social distancing. What is meant is not social distancing. What is meant is something called physical distancing of 2 meters. Social communication interaction is something that we need when we are distancing ourselves with other human beings. Because by very definition, human beings are social beings. The moment you take away the ability for us to be able to communicate and interface with others, that is in itself is going to bring upon a whole host of mental disorders. And I was listening to a lecture, this last one I'm going to mention. I was listening to a lecture by Professor Malik Badri, who is one of the foremost psychiatrists, in the Muslim world, just a couple of days ago. And his theory is that the next pandemic will be a pandemic of mental health disorders. So all of these things that we're talking about, agoraphobia and suddenly obsessive compulsive disorders, everybody suddenly wants to wash their hands 25 times a day after every single thing, doesn't want to touch anybody, doesn't want to do this, doesn't want to do that. A whole host of things are going to come into play, and then suddenly people don't want you to, people would be reluctant to visit people again, or their friends, or to do things which you previously did, not realizing that this is just another phase. And that if things are meant to happen, after the infection and after the our scientists and so on, help us to be able to understand what is happening, then we can get back to some level of normalcy. But this he says is the next big pandemic which is coming, a pandemic of mental health disorders.
Jazakallah khair, may Allah protect us from such calamities. But
maybe Brother Shazad in 2 weeks' time can talk about it in more detail, inshallah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Dr. Riza, thank you very much again for taking time out for us. It's always a delight to have you on. I'm very appreciative of all the contributions you make to our work. Thank you to all the attendees who took time out to register and join us today for this webinar. Do join us again next week, the 12th of May, same time, inshallah, where we'll be talking about keeping zakat local. For now, Jazakallah khair, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and see you all next week.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you all for coming, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother.